Good morning. I had an occasion to go on a long bike ride. It was sponsored by the local Giant store, a Taiwanese bike manufacturer. And we rode along the East Coast all the way from my home to in Hualien, all the way down to the bottom of the island, along the very beautiful scenic coast. And the distance that we pedaled was about 160 kilometers, 100 miles more or less that I used to title this teaching, this episode. It was in the course of completing this ride. For most of the ride, I have a pace. It's slower than most, but I can go and go and go at my pace. And once I hit my pace, I don't like to stop or take a break. So I took a lot less breaks than I didn't stop for lunch, for instance. I passed two of the rest stops that were set up so wonderfully with drinks and bananas and oranges and maybe a chocolate bar. I just chose to keep my pace. And a lot of time, a lot of reflection. And with 60 riders going this distance, we were stretched so far that essentially I was riding alone. No one was in my immediate area for most of the trip. And I had my headphones in, plugged into my iPhone mounted on the front handlebars, and listened to meditation music. So this too helped me with my rhythm. It took between 8 and 8.5 hours to complete the ride. And needless to say, it offered a lot of time for meditation. And remember, this coast is beautiful. It's so scenic. And I was just looking towards the mountains on my right, towards the sea on my left, to the point that now, this was Saturday, today is Tuesday, so 4 days later, the neck is a little bit stiff, a little bit soreness in the legs, but okay. The important thing is about milestones. This was at least 3 times longer than I've ever ridden a bike, 3 times the distance than I've ever ridden a bike in my life, more than 3 times. The longest bike ride of my life. And I'm 70. Gee, there's still time for firsts. There's still opportunities to have a new and a first experience. And that in and of itself was all the reward I needed for this extended bike ride. The fact of renewal. And it also led me to reflect about one of my continuing approaches to life. I've always been slow but steady. I move slowly. I speak slowly. The only thing fast that seems above my existence is my mind. Before I learn to begin taming it, my monkey mind was as fast as, or faster than any around me. I could go from mentally point A to point B in milliseconds. In the blink of an eye, I could have circled the globe. Mentally. So, this mind has been a challenge. My monkey mind is still there, but it's in the background. My mind that I've become to accept as my tool in my spiritual exploration, this questioning, evaluating, weighing, filing, storing, accessing information when I need it, building connections much as a spider builds a web. This is facilitate the retrieval of the information so that I can happily say that when I need to know something, I will know it. If I don't know it, then I know I don't need to know it. So all the time, the monkey mind is constant companion. And after 30 years of trying to silence it, 30 years in vain, trying to silence the monkey mind, I've learned to be happy with taming it. And a lot of this taming of this constant noise inside has been, number one, to dampen it, turn down the volume of the monkey mind. And secondly, I've kept it entertained by assigning it tasks. It's like a well-trained dog happily wanting to please its master by doing the chores assigned to it. So after trying to choke it, to silence it, all in the vain hope that it would lead to clarity, as much of my interpretation of Zen precepts had promised that by silencing the mind comes clarity. But taming the mind, eliminating its nature of constant internal questioning. I exhausted my questions I no longer have any questions of anyone or anything. Most importantly, self-questioning has been thoroughly exhausted. But my mind is content. My monkey mind is very content. It was able to accept the toning down, the lowering of the volume of the internal dialogue, non-stop, the speed of light practically. It could accept limitations. It could accept taming and even thrive. Now it goes and gets, it retrieves, it seeks out information that it carries in its little mouth like a dog to continue that to continue that visualization, that metaphor, like a little piece of information, like a bone, and it drops it at the feet of the greater mind, my mind. That's my tool that will begin to gnaw on this bone, to get to the marrow, to get to the point where it's not sure if it's useful to me or not, while discarding all that needs to be filed in the bin of not so. And then I turn it over. My greater mind turns it over to the ultimate master of them all, my heart. And it's here that it's further refined. It's further mined. Some goes to the dustbin. Most, having recognized the truth within, goes in the largest folder of them all. The unknowable, the great unknowable, the folder of the great unknowable, while bits and pieces remain that become part of the known. Things that I accept and recognize that I do know. Sometimes I rely on the intrinsic sense to say, aha. That's my aha moments. Aha, I know that, I've known that, and I always will know that. So of the three folders, the trash bin, the not so bin, the folder of the great unknowable, and what I do know, the third being by far the smallest of my three folders. So I talked about building a web because it's the most visual. For me, it's what I can visualize that makes sense of this process of the interconnectedness of everything and everyone somewhere on this web. This web of three dimensions. It has some height, some width, and some length. as it floats essentially in the fourth dimension of time, space, time, matter. So this is what I spend 8+ hours, part of what kept me occupied on this ride. To the point that at many times I felt distanced from the person that was so steadily pedaling for all that period of time. And I remembered that I've never been quite as happy, quite as content with work. I was a house painter to put myself through the university, and I liked the mindlessness of repetitive action that could allow me to escape to my inner realms, which were always much more important than what was going on around me physically. Physical level was only to support the inner life. Outer life, by necessity, meant working, earning money, buying food, sustenance of the physical form. This great gift that we're given, that without which our inner work would be impossible. The inner work that's necessary, that's available to us at this level. When we transcend the need for a physical body, when we're a light body, there will be a different kind of work, I'm sure, that will be necessary to sustain the inner, the formless self, which is truly what we are. They'll need to be sustained through some kind of work. That's to be sure. So in one sense, our work is never done. I find that comforting somehow, because as I get in the rhythm of work, as I was in the rhythm of this pedaling along this beautiful coast, it allowed the inner work to not only go on, but to flourish. So as I was saying, I felt this real odd disconnect. And odd disconnect between the inner work and the outer form. And this is another constant in my life. I'd mentioned previously that slow but steady. And the connection between my inner self and outer self has been always tenuous at best. I'm coordinated, well coordinated, good in particular sports, swimming being foremost among them. But baseball, I loved baseball. I was a good third baseman. So in the baseball field, inner and outer connected. In a swimming pool, it was more or less that repetitive physical action that led me to that freed me to dwell in the inner realms of which I find most comforting, where my solace is, the shelter, the protection from the harsh world, sometimes harsh world that we find ourselves living in. And again, bicycling. My brother accompanied me on this bike. He was part of the 60 other riders. And I found comfort in that because some of my earliest memories are of him and I sneaking out of the house while mom and sister were sleeping and going on long, extended bike rides in the middle of the night. We had a history of this. So the beginnings and the ends tying together through this commonality of a bicycle. So these are the kind of things this 100 miles, this 160-kilometer bike ride gave cause and opportunity for the reflections I'm sharing today. It motivated me to put this attempt, this video ahead. I have a backlog. I've already pre-named future talks, and the names pretty much without fail have come during sleep. Bipausal, bimodal, sleep patterns. When I sleep for part of the night, wake up for 2 or 3 hours, and sleep again. But sometimes my iPad is right next to me because when I get inspired, when I'm given an inspiration for another sharing, I wake up and type a note with the name. So I'm 6 or 8 or 10 ahead of the game. But sometimes the order is never sacred to me. It's as the Spirit moves me. But this title, this sharing springs from a physical activity, an involvement, and pretty satisfied with this accomplishment. I had never pigeonholed or never confined myself to the idea that I must complete this. I didn't feel driven to complete. There's backup vans, and you can put your bike in a van and ride at any point that you decide that you've had enough. And near the beginning of the ride was the steepest part of the trip. The mountains were fairly steep, and the road was wet, and the downhills were pretty intense. So this was the 20 plus km that I chose not to ride. It was the second leg. I'd already completed close to 28 kilometers of a steady uphill, and just felt that I would rather complete the length of the race, which is mostly uphill with a little more slight incline than downhill. But basically, relatively flat. So I jumped in the van and passed the hills. And especially aware that the road being wet, we were all wet at this point, even though the rain had let up. But coming down, not only the work of going up, and my practice bike riding is pretty much on flat grounds. So I was finding, when I was pedaling the first leg, finding that the exact muscles that were necessary for uphill, because that's what ached. So I took a break, got out again, and then basically pedaled nonstop the rest of the way. So a half an hour van ride to eliminate both the ardor of the steep uphill and, more importantly, the danger of going downhill with traffic on a wet, windy road. So I didn't have any unrealistic expectations. I wasn't sure if I could complete the bike ride or not, but as I was in the bike ride, I knew that slow but steady had always served me well and would thankfully continue to serve me well. So the difference between, I was reflecting on the difference between the appearance of the outside and the reality of the inside, and it helped support my dismissal of judgment, which, by the way, judgment of all the obstacles stayed with me the longest. To be non-judgmental, having a quick mind, lends itself without constant vigilance, lends itself to being judgmental. And judging can be very subtle and become such an intrinsic part of your nature that this was what I worked on. Jealousy, greed, were more easily left behind. So as much, when you can get past the most difficult judgment, in my case, there's something to be said for that, some reward just springs from overcoming your most difficult obstacles. And now, these things always will pop up again and again to see if they have an opportunity to take hold. Just as the monkey mind, just as the ego will appear from time to time, almost hopefully trying to trying to get their foot in the door, and constant vigilance, the art of letting go, the acceptance of how ordinary we are, and the beauty within ordinariness. This vigilance, this letting go, this learning to not take yourself seriously through laughter directed at yourself, which I do spend a lot of time laughing at myself. So this vigilance, and when you meet these things head on, for me, if that judgment pops up, I recognize it, I forgive myself, I let it go, I laugh. So it's not to say that you've conquered these things as you would conquer a mountain. It's that you've learned to dismiss. You've learned what the intent and purposes of these attempts to come back. And you smile, and you laugh, and you breathe, and you let go. So my practice of letting go is an ongoing, continual, just as is everything else. There's no end goal. There's always another mountain on the horizon. There's always more steps to take. There's, without obstacles, without change, there would be almost no opportunity for growth. So barriers or obstacles or problems or trouble only provide opportunities to grow, to live life as we were meant to remember all that we had forgotten, and to forget